The people of this nation have spoken. They've delivered us a clear victory, a convincing victory.
If you count the legal votes, I easily win. If you count the illegal votes, they can try to steal the election from us.
America has decided Biden will be the next president of the United States, but the White House says this election is far from over, as President Trump remains defiant, refusing to concede. Hello and welcome to Inside America with me, Ghida Fakhry. As President-elect, Joe Biden moves ahead with his transition plans and announces some of the major Trump policies he would overturn on day one of his presidency. The incumbent president continues to reject election results, making unsubstantiated claims of widespread voter fraud. Trump's decision to fire Secretary of Defense Mark Esper has added to the uncertainty surrounding the transition period. The Attorney General's directive, authorizing the Department of Justice to look into, quote, substantial allegations of irregularities, throws the election certification process into further turmoil. While Biden supporters erupted in celebration after Pennsylvania put the Democratic ticket over the 270 electoral votes needed to win, with a record 76 million votes, the Trump campaign is seeking an emergency injunction to stop state officials in Pennsylvania from certifying the results. Although Trump is the first incumbent president to lose re-election in almost 30 years, he remains very popular, with 71 million Americans voting for him. That's the second highest number of votes ever cast for a presidential candidate. He got 8 million more votes than in 2016. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, meanwhile, has publicly thrown his support behind President Trump's refusal to concede.
President Trump is 100% within his rights to look into allegations of irregularities and weigh his legal options.
So while Trump delays the process of handing transition resources over to his rival, Biden announced a task force to address the urgent need of tackling the pandemic and vowed to unify the deeply divided nation.
It's time to put away the harsh rhetoric, lower the temperature, see each other again, listen to each other again. And to make progress, we have to stop treating our opponents as our enemies. They are not our enemies. They are Americans. They are Americans.
So are the temperatures lowering, or are things just heating up? Joining me now is House Majority Whip James Clyburn. The South Carolina Democratic congressman holds the third highest position in the U.S. House of Representatives. His endorsement of Biden during the primaries is widely considered to have solidified support among Black voters and helped Biden secure the nomination of the Democratic Party. Congressman Clyburn, congratulations on the election of your candidate, Joe Biden. Thank you, and thank you for being with us. Many believe it was your strong endorsement of Biden on the eve of Super Tuesday that got him to where he is today. Election data is also beginning to show that it was the African-American vote in key battleground states that put the Biden-Harris ticket over the finish line. How satisfied are you with the results so far and the pivotal role African-American voters played in this election?
I'm very satisfied. I had hoped that the election would be much more definitive, but I guess you took it in a way that you can get it. Joe Biden, I think, has the kind of record and the set of experiences that seem to me to give him a chance to get the country back on track. 4 years ago, the election resulted in a president who has shown very little sensitivity to the challenges that we face in this country, challenges that were introduced in large measure over 400 years ago when Blacks first came to the shores of this country. 1619 was when the first African-American appeared here. And we've been battling with the issue of race ever since. And we have tried hard with all of our leaders to try and reconcile these differences and move an agenda forward that would be beneficial to everybody. But 4 years ago, we inaugurated a president who seems to be more intent on exacerbating those issues rather than resolving them.
And you say you're satisfied with the election results, but a strong base of Trump's support, white American voters, stood by him. In fact, he got the support of 71 million voters. How concerned are you about that and the fact that the president is still unwilling to concede? Could there be a backlash against the Black and Latino vote, in your opinion, in places like Michigan and Georgia, even in Texas? I say backlash because, as you mentioned, racism in America is still very much alive. And you know better than I do that some Americans are frightened by the demographic shifts in this country.
Well, there could be a backlash. Well, there certainly was a backlash to Barack Obama. And that backlash was led by Donald Trump. He is the one that exacerbated the so-called birther issue. And that, more than anything else, I think, fueled the fires that erupted over Barack Obama's election. I think it would have been a great thing if he would have done what so many others did, and that is to welcome that change in the presidency. No, he did not. He did just the opposite. And he has developed a cadre of followers across the country that seem to help him with that.
Let me ask you about the statements that Lindsey Graham, the Republican senator from your state, South Carolina, has made. He won re-election quite easily. He and the Republican leadership in the Senate and the House have yet to accept Biden as the president-elect. Here's what he said after the election results were called in Biden's favor.
We will work with Biden if he wins, but Trump has not lost. Do not concede, Mr. President. Fight hard.
Senator Graham also said that Democrats win elections because they cheat. Your reaction?
Well, you know, I'll just say this. I'm used to Southerners standing in the schoolhouse door. George Wallace said never. And if Lindsey Graham want to put himself in history alongside the George Wallaces of the world, let him have it. But that is just foolhardy. But that is the kind of stuff that I would have hoped that every Southern white person would be working to put behind us rather than hold it out in front of us. To say that we win only when we cheat? Who was it begging for the support of foreign powers 4 years ago? That was not a Democrat. That was a Republican that he's supporting.
And Graham is not the only Republican in denial, seemingly. There's also the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, who said there will be a smooth transition to a second Trump administration. What do you make of these statements?
I don't make anything of them. They're just foolishness.
How concerned, though, are you that Trump will not make a concession speech, that he will derail the whole transition process? And what happens if he does not concede?
I don't know what happens if he doesn't concede. I do know this. He will not succeed even if he doesn't concede.
But what happens? What will Congress do if Trump refuses to accept the certified results and refuses to leave office by noon on the 20th of January? Could we be heading towards a major crisis? Because the 20th Amendment of the Constitution states quite clearly that the terms of the president and the vice president shall end at noon on the 20th of January.
We learn to predict based upon history. There is no history of that ever having happened. So I have absolutely no idea what will happen, and I will not venture any guess.
But should Congress start preparing for the prospect of this happening?
I don't think so. I think Congress should continue to do its work as if this country will continue to function as it always has. And if something were to happen and the country doesn't function that way, then we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
What about President Trump's decision to fire his defense secretary on Monday? Many people say it cannot but be seen in the context of these elections, although we know that the relationship between the two had not been good for quite some time. This must be of concern, isn't it, to you and many members of Congress?
Well, no, most of all the other things that he's done, I've always been concerned about Trump since he first got elected. I said over 2 years ago that Donald Trump did not plan to leave office. I said that Donald Trump made me understand what was going on in Germany back in the 1930s. And Donald Trump is doing what he's doing is because there are a lot of people in this country dealing with him the same way some of the people of Germany dealt with Hitler. And I would have hoped that history would have been much more instructive for them. I don't understand how anybody can say they are patriots, standing up for the defense of this country, and participate in that kind of activity, because that's not what this country purports to be.
House Majority Whip James Clyburn, a great pleasure to have you on the program. Thank you so very much for making time to speak with us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Meanwhile, President Trump continues to make allegations of electoral fraud without presenting any evidence, claiming that he had won the election with, quote, 71 million legal votes, and that, quote, bad things happened which our observers weren't allowed to see. Now his team of legal advisors have taken their complaints to the courts.
Not a single Republican has been able to look at any one of these mail ballots. They could be from Mars, as far as we're concerned, or they could be from the Democratic National Committee. Joe Biden could have voted 50 times.
The Trump campaign has filed about a dozen lawsuits, and several Republican state attorneys general have backed the president's claims of fraud. But the long-shot lawsuits appear unlikely to overturn the results. I'm now joined by Alberto Gonzales. He was U.S. Attorney General under George W. Bush and is now Dean at Belmont University College of Law. Attorney General Gonzales, it's good to have you.
Thank you.
As a former Attorney General, how do you view Bill Barr's decision to authorize U.S. attorneys across the country to pursue, quote, substantial allegations of voting irregularities before the election result is certified?
Well, of course, I'm not aware of any such case, and so there may not be anything that the U.S. attorneys are going to do. That memo could be interpreted as simply a memo just to do your job. On the other hand, it does give rise to the perception in certain communities in America that the Department of Justice is getting involved in politics, and I think that's unfortunate. And I think as Attorney General of the United States, one of your primary responsibilities is to protect the institution, the Department of Justice. And the perception that the department is being used for political reasons is not one that any Attorney General should be involved with.
Well, let me quote part of this guidance. Bill Barr wrote, although the states have the primary responsibility to conduct and supervise elections under our Constitution and the laws enacted by Congress, the United States Department of Justice has an obligation to ensure that federal elections are conducted in such a way that the American people can have full confidence in their electoral process and their government. But the question is, should the DOJ get involved in this election process?
Well, DOJ has a responsibility to enforce federal election law. That's their job. And so to the extent that there is evidence that federal election laws have been violated, it is absolutely the role of the Department of Justice to be involved. But as a general matter, these elections are conducted at the state level. And most of the time, the challenges that exist occur within our state courts. And so it would be unusual to have the federal government step in with respect to an election of this type. But to answer your question, yes, under the right circumstances, it would be appropriate for the Department of Justice to be involved.
But under these circumstances, though, Attorney General, many people would argue that your Department of Justice under Bill Barr has caved in to political pressures from the Trump administration. Aren't you concerned?
Of course I'm concerned. Yes, I'm very concerned. But I'm always reminded of the fact that I don't know what I don't know. And there may be information that the department has that has motivated the Attorney General to do this, because with respect to every election, the department sends out monitors to various jurisdictions around the country. They may have information that was provided to the Attorney General. Now, if the Attorney General or if the campaign has information of widespread voter fraud, obviously that's something that's got to be resolved in the courts, but they would do themselves good, and I think it would be helpful to the American people to learn of that information as soon as possible. We all want our elections to be free of fraud and abuse, and we all want the votes to be counted. So it's just a question. I'm sorry.
Forgive me
Go
for
ahead.
interrupting you, but from what we know so far, Attorney General Gonzales, are the legal challenges that we're seeing, are they based on evidence and the law? For now, the president has been claiming voter fraud. He's been talking about illegal votes, but he hasn't backed it up with supporting evidence in court filings. And several lawsuits, as you know, have already been dismissed, including one by the Supreme Court. Is this just a frivolous attempt by the Trump campaign to delegitimize the result?
I'm not aware of any massive voter fraud, widespread voter fraud. I'm not aware of a level of abuse or fraud that would in any way change the outcome of this election based upon what I know in my brain, what I know in my heart, and based upon my experience. I believe Joe Biden won this election. Now, if in fact the president and the Department of Justice has information that calls that into question, they have the right to challenge that. But I'm telling you, based on what I've seen and what I've heard, I don't believe that there's enough there to overturn the results of this election. And I think Joe Biden has won this election.
So you're saying Biden is the indisputable president-elect?
Well, it's not indisputable until the votes are actually certified. All the votes there are still votes that have not been counted. We believe in counting all the votes. After all the votes are counted, then the votes are certified. At that point, I think it's fair to say there's no question that Joe Biden has won this election.
But he's already crossed the 270 electoral votes threshold. But looking at the flurry of legal challenges designed to lay the groundwork, some people would say, for what is yet to come, correct me if I'm wrong, but under the law, state electors, those 270 needed by a candidate to get to the White House, are under no legal obligation in most cases to cast their vote for the candidate who won the election in the state they represent. Is this scenario conceivable? Can the US plunge into a constitutional crisis or even worse?
Anything is possible, of course, but I doubt very seriously that we're going to get there. We have institutions that serve as guardrails to prevent that from happening. We have the goodwill of individuals, I firmly believe in my heart, that will prevent this from happening. And so I do not believe we're at a point where we have a constitutional crisis. We have an election, the votes are being counted, someone is challenging the results of the election, and we'll see how this thing plays out.
All right, well, conceding an election is not codified, though. It's a tradition, a norm. And President Trump still refuses to concede. How serious a predicament is the US in if he continues to refuse to concede?
In my judgment, it's not an emergency at this point that he concede and that the process of the transition begins. I still think there is time to do that so that Joe Biden's team can receive the necessary clearances, the necessary information to begin forming a new government. I don't think we're there yet. So I still believe that there's time to count votes, and there is still time for President Trump to mount challenges if he believes they're appropriate. I only hope that to the extent that those challenges occur, that they're mounted in good faith and not based upon some desire to delegitimize the incoming administration.
Let me ask you very briefly if you agree with two of your successors as attorneys general, a Democrat, Eric Holder, a Republican, Michael Mukasey, who wrote this: "There is the insidious danger posed by charges that have nothing to support them other than an accuser's invitation to us to hallucinate evil. The widespread distrust of our institutions and processes that such rhetoric encourages can paralyze us just as surely as violence or the uncertainty generated by a torrent of litigation." Is this an invitation to hallucinate evil? The institutions are being tested to breaking point, aren't they? And are you concerned that there could be violence in the streets of America?
Well, they're certainly being tested. I'd like to think they're not being tested to a breaking point. Could there be violence? This is why it's very important for our leadership to step up and be clear about the fact that there should not be violence and that the rule of law will ultimately prevail. I think that's very, very important. So I agree with what I do agree that there is a potential for violence, but that's something we need to try to avoid at all costs.
Former U.S. Attorney General Alberto Gonzales, a pleasure to have you on the program. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Now to Georgia, a state still hanging in the balance, preparing for another onslaught of political ads and a recount. The election isn't over for Georgians. With Biden in the lead by less than half a percentage point, the state has yet to be called.
With a margin that small, there will be likely a recount in Georgia. Interest in our election obviously goes far beyond our borders. The final tally in Georgia at this point has huge implications for the entire country.
Georgia will decide who controls the Senate, with 4 candidates heading for a runoff on January 5th. It's an uphill battle for Democrats to win 2 seats in the red state, but if they succeed, it would bring the Senate to a 50-50 split. And if Biden wins, Vice President-elect Kamala Harris could hold the tie-breaking vote in the Senate. Let's put this in focus with Martha Zoller, a former Republican congressional candidate in Georgia. She's also a conservative commentator. Martha Zoller, all eyes are on Georgia. The balance of power in the Senate will be decided by your state in those runoffs. You worked with Republican Governor Brian Kemp, who is now saying that, quote, Georgia's election result will include legally cast ballots and only legally cast ballots. President Trump, as a result, responded saying, this is good news, it means I won. Is he right to claim victory?
Look, Georgia has been getting tighter as far as being a red state for the last 6 or 7 years. President Trump only won by 51.8% in 2016. Then Brian Kemp, who I worked for, only won by 54,000 votes, okay, out of the most votes ever cast in an election. We had another one of those elections with the most votes ever cast. And it's going to be tight. And it's very difficult to overturn counts once they've been made. But there is a process to do it, and we need to follow that process through.
But as we know, recounts can only change the results if it is a few hundred votes difference. The margin of Biden in Georgia is far bigger than that. It's a few thousand. The lieutenant governor of Georgia, also a Republican, was asked a couple of days ago if he'd seen any evidence of systemic fraud or irregularities and said, we've not seen any credible evidence or examples. A judge also dismissed a case citing no evidence. It's pretty authoritative and conclusive, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the important part of recount is going to be the absentee ballots and looking at those absentee ballots. There's been a few irregularities in a few counties. You know, it's funny, Georgia has 159 counties, but the problems and the slow counting always is in the same 4 counties every single time. So we're going to be working very hard, but our eyes are not that we don't care about the presidential race. We do, but our eyes are looking towards January 5th, and the Senate runoff. It's extremely important that people get back out to vote. That's what runoffs are about. And that split won't actually be 50-50. It'll be 50-48 too, because there are 2 senators that identify as independents. So these 2 senators could give the majority to Republicans as far as organizing the Senate, right? So that who decides who the chairman of the committees are, who decides what the schedule is. And it's so a lot is at stake here. I believe if Joe Biden is the president, it looks more and more like that's what's going to happen. If Joe Biden's the president, he's going to be more like Joe Biden if he has a Republican Senate.
Would you agree that Trump's strategy seems to be to ensure that some states, including Georgia, does not certify the election results? Is that the strategy, and do you think your state will heed the call?
It is the strategy, but the challenge with that is, based on Georgia law, is the election results have to be certified before the recount can start. So, you know, it is a frustrating thing, and I see that's what President Trump is trying to do. But if we don't certify the election results, then the recount doesn't start. That's what has to happen. So the recount will start, and it'll be after the election results are certified.
All right. Martha Zoller, thanks very much for joining me.
Thank you.
Now, by definition, any democratic presidential election is a fork in the road for a nation. But the United States presidential election was more than that. It was anxiously awaited in the US and throughout the world. We had to wait 4 long days for major TV networks, as is customary here in the United States, to announce who is the president-elect. Until now, the losing candidate has always conceded, marking the beginning of a smooth transfer of power. But neither the Constitution nor US law charters the path towards a peaceful transition, leaving it to norms and tradition. So today the US is in uncharted territory as President Trump continues to claim to be the lawful winner of the presidential contest. Conceding is simply not part of his lexicon. For months, many have speculated half-jokingly about Trump refusing to leave the White House if he is defeated. But following the firing of the Secretary of Defense, the humor has given way to serious concerns that the defeated president, still supported by the Republican leadership in Congress, has become a danger to the national security of the United States. And so, in short, when a former director of the CIA says that Trump is as dangerous as an injured tiger, and suggests that the Vice President and Cabinet should invoke Article 25 of the US Constitution to remove the President at this stage, just weeks before the end of his presidency, you know that America is truly in uncharted waters, and it may even be walking on thin ice. That's all from me, Ghida Fakhry. Let us know what you think. From all the team here in Washington, for now, thanks for watching.